Politics without the soap opera, with unfiltered constitutional conservative truth. The Conservative Review with Daniel Horowitz.
And welcome back, fellow taxpayers, American patriots, and non-drug abusing Americans. Believe it or not, you guys exist out there. This is the Conservative Review podcast. This is Daniel Horowitz back in the house, Friday, December 6th, the end of the week already. But you guys were clamoring for me to come back from my illness, and thank God, God has delivered me back earlier than I thought, because I think we all need a new movement, a new focus for those of us who aren't criminals, aren't drug addicts, aren't illegal aliens, don't want subsidies, just want government to keep us safe, do its core jobs at a federal and state level, and then leave us alone to live our lives with our families, our communities, and as individuals. But we don't have much of a party or a movement or a media outlet speaking to those people. It's truly sad. It's truly unfortunate. And I was thinking today being December 6th. Tomorrow is December 7th, and all of you know what that means. That's the day that will live on in infamy. 78th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attacks. And I was just thinking, and I know I've said this before in previous years, that when you look back at the clarity of mission, the sense of purpose of a nation. This was FDR being president at the time. He was a Democrat, but everyone understood what America was about, what it was we needed to preserve. Everyone understood the simple concept of territorial integrity, that we have a country and you can't have foreign belligerents overrun that country, even though Hawaii was a territory at the time. But we owned it, and we had to have a swift response. We had to ensure that never happened again. And it's really part of the forgotten part of the war. We focus a lot on the Eastern Front, on Germany, but man, was that a dogfight. I mean, they had a larger Navy and Air Force at that time in 1941 than we did, and it was the greatest generation. We slugged it out in Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. I mean, some of those battles are just unbelievable. The sacrifices that took place, but the clarity and sense of mission. Here we are 78 years later, and we have no territorial, jurisdictional sovereignty, integrity on our own soil. One of the things I really didn't get a chance to delve into because I got sick over Thanksgiving, everything. Right before Thanksgiving, one of the greatest things of this year took place. Something that a lot of us have been clamoring for, advocating for many years, was actually fulfilled, or at least indulged. The president announced that he was finally going to designate the Mexican cartels as foreign terror organizations. They affect us more negatively and just more pervasively than anything around. Not just the 70,000 drug deaths every year, but really a lot of the transnational gangs that are really juicing up those body counts in Chicago and other cities. Guess what? It's not so much an internal problem. We do have our internal problems. It's fueled by external Mexican cartels. Really, if you look at the cartels, they affect us, our sovereignty, in two ways. You have the Texas, Arizona border states where they're directly running operations almost overtly, where you have their foot soldiers and their Hakones, their scouts, controlling territory, at least in an asymmetrical way. And we don't do anything about it. It's just drugs. That's the mentality of our government. And then number two, in all 50 states, in all cities, and as we've spoken about a lot recently, in rural communities, they are directly conducting operations through criminal alien networks, and we just allow it to go on when we could easily just retain our sovereignty. We were able to do Okinawa and Iwo Jima. We could simply just keep the trash out of our country. It's not that hard. But unfortunately, we haven't been doing that. But thankfully, Trump finally announced that we will have a sense of mission. Yes, the Mexican cartels need to be targeted. But what does that mean? Where is it going to head? And what's the state of play in general with the cartels and the drug crisis? With us today is a very special guest. It's been a while, but too long since we've had him on. Derek Maltz is the former special agent in charge of DEA's Special Operations Division. He held that position for about a decade, from 2005 to 2014. Previously, he was in DEA's New York office. He was a DEA agent for almost 3 decades. And he really tirelessly pushed for this terrorism designation. So, Derek, it's great to have you on, and congratulations for finally having your voice heard on this issue.
Thank you, Daniel. It's great to be back. Appreciate the invite.
Well, look, we could talk forever about so many facets of this, because really drugs, crime, terrorism, gangs, illegal immigration, sometimes legal immigration, wrong-headed legal immigration, all tie in one nexus. So there's many spheres to this. But I wanted to start off with the terrorism designation. What a lot of my listeners are emailing me is like, look, we understand Trump's heart is in the right place, but the same problem we have on every issue is that the people within the executive branch, and sometimes that includes even the shallow state that he's appointed, but certainly the deep state, within all the law enforcement, national security, intelligence agencies, do not support this. They don't view the Mexican cartels as the threat that you and I do. And they're asking, is this actually kinetic? He says he wants to do this. Could you explain what has taken place and what needs to happen for us to ensure that the vision that the president wants implemented is actually done?
Okay, so Daniel, the number one and most important point is that we are facing a very troubling national security crisis. This is not a drug issue alone, as you said. This is impacting all our communities around America, all our kids around America, our future. So the president is taking it very serious. The president wants to do something. The problem with this town, the Beltway, talks a lot, but they don't get things done. So the president is kind of unique in the sense that he wants to make a difference. He wants to save lives. He's sick and tired of seeing families that are crying about their loved ones that have died suddenly from the fentanyl poison or the methamphetamine poison. So here's the deal. What's happening is you're watching the bureaucracy unfold and work in the Beltway. So of course they're pushing back because everybody's territorial. You opened up your segment by saying how all of these things are connected. But guess what, Daniel? The sad part is the government's not connected. The agencies are not connected. Everybody's fighting for their turf. Now, how do I know that? Because I worked at the Special Operations Division prior to 9/11. I watched the chaos unfold when the planes hit the tower and no one knew what the hell was going on, right? So when I got back to the Special Operations Division in 2005, there were 9 agencies working there. Because I had a clear vision on synchronizing the efforts of all these great patriots and these agencies, I built it up to 30 different agencies, 3 countries and the NYPD. So I had visibility on what I call the Beltway madness, okay? And Beltway madness is just a bunch of bureaucrats trying to feel important instead of doing the work that we get paid to do. And so there is a lot of naysayers right now. And I want to make something clear to your show and to your listeners and your viewers.
Sure.
I don't care what they call it, but I think it's the most devastating crisis this country has ever faced. Look at the amount of people that are dying. Let's just look at synthetic opioids. Over 32,000 last year. That's like 90 a day. Okay? So I don't care if you call it a terrorist organization. I don't care if you call it a narco-terrorist organization. Put whatever label you want. But we have to go after these cartels like we've never done before. Now, I'm going to tell you an interesting little point here. So, as you know, we have transnational criminal organizations. We have foreign terrorist organizations. They both have these wacky Beltway definitions, which, quite frankly, I don't care about the definitions. I care about going after the bad guys that are impacting our public safety. So here's the thing. What we're trying to do is try to fit that square peg in the round hole definition of an FTO, right? The ideology. Well, the Mexican cartels, they're only caring about the money. Well, that's not totally true. Look what they're doing in Mexico with the kidnappings, the extortion, the human trafficking, taking over cities, right? Look what happened last week, 2 weeks ago, 23 people dead, thousands of bullets being sprayed, right? These cartels are a threat that we've never seen. And going back to the point about Islamic terrorists, the Mexican cartels are a far greater threat than the Islamic terrorists right now, because we've been pounding the Islamic terrorists for years. The cartels, we kind of let them off easy because, they're our southern trading partner. What about the people dying all over America? What about the families crying right now because they just found a loved one in the bed? So there's a lot to talk about with this designation. Personally, I look at it as just another beltway show. Here's the problem. I lived through the Obama administration transnational crime designation. I lived through even Trump signing the executive order 2 years ago to go after transnational criminals. I also lived through the entire Hezbollah Operation Cassandra, seeing Hezbollah connected to the Mexican cartels. But here's what I also lived through. The lack of a unity of effort and leadership by the government agencies to get their people to work together and put the best and brightest and the most incredible patriots together with the capabilities and authorities. If we did that, then maybe we wouldn't have to say, let's declare them for a terrorist organization. But right now, sadly, one way to get everybody focused is if they were designated terrorists, we would put the best and brightest, the focused on the target, and put all the capabilities and the authorities. And like I like to say, Dan, all the tools in the toolbox. Because right now we're not using all the tools, right? So why would anybody in America say no to using more tools to go after these savages? That's the question.
So that's the thing we have to watch out with at this point. Are we going to go kinetic with this? Is it actually going to be implemented, or is it going to go the way of a lot of aspirational things the president comments on, but it doesn't become policy? That's what some of us are just a little concerned about. That,
Dan,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but here's the thing. There's a big difference between a policy, a strategy, and an operational implementation plan. That's what's been lacking in all of these strategies in the Beltway. We have really smart people in these government agencies, and they're dedicated Americans, and they can put together these beautiful looking policies that read really well. You get the think tanks that will help. They get paid all that money to write up these nice documents, and it's all great. But what is the implementation plan? Who's in charge? Who's being held accountable? Like right now, we have, and I don't know if you knew this, Dan, Attorney General Sessions formed a task force against 5 threats, okay? Sinaloa, Jalisco Cartel, MS-13, Lebanese Hezbollah, and the cartel in Colombia. I forgot the name of it, but it's a newer cartel. But here's the problem. They designated attorneys to be in charge of those task forces, but there's no plan to vigorously attack them. So this is what's missing. So going back to the FTO thing, I've seen our government in action when they have foreign terrorists on their radar, okay? And I've seen what can be done by the DOD, by the intel community, by Treasury, by the State Department. I've seen it. We know right now, 100% fact, that law enforcement actions have not worked. They're not good enough. Now, I feel bad about that because I worked my butt off in my years of law enforcement, and I thought we were doing a good job, locking up bad guys, taking drugs off the street, taking guns, taking money. But obviously, the drug crisis today is worse than it's ever been. So what else do we need to do? So we have a lot to discuss about this topic.
Yes.
There's no simple answer. It's a very complex public health crisis, national security emergency. It's not just a very simple solution.
And I like the way you said that. You can't view it just as a law enforcement thing. Hey, I caught someone peddling drugs on the street. Let's go investigate. Let's go prosecute. Well, no, you got to look holistically and externally. This is coming externally. Where is the source? You know, I've always said a war on an item doesn't work. War on guns doesn't work because where you have gun control, everyone has guns except for the people that need to defend themselves, like in Chicago. It's the same thing with drugs. You focus on the item, well, it's not going to work. But what we've never done is said, wait a minute. We're just allowing these guys safe harbor. So Derek, here's the deal. I know I told you this, and I don't know if you've been following. I know you and Jason and I talk a lot, and Jason's really big on this. On Tuesday, there was a big massacre in Villa Union, about 20 miles south of Laredo in Chihuahua province in Mexico. Some Mexican police got killed by the CDN cartel. And right away, the governor of Chihuahua came out with a statement and said that one of the CDN groups that were involved, as many as 150 fighters. I mean, we talk about fighters in Syria, fighters in Afghanistan. I mean, right there, traversed Texas territory to go to that operation in Villa Union. Within a couple hours, he recanted it. Breitbart Texas reported this. And it makes you wonder, wait a minute. I mean, we've had reports of cartel members directly. I mean, they're all over all 50 states, but I'm talking about in overt operations in military, paramilitary gear coming on our soil with weapons. I don't think we would tolerate Al-Qaeda doing that. So the question is, how do we get the terrorism designation to focus our, DOD, DHS, state, CIA to view Sinaloa and CDN doing that type of stuff the way we would view Al-Qaeda doing it?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the border is wide open. You made a good point before. I was going to interrupt you, but I let you speak. Like, fighting a war on an item is not going to work. But what we're missing is the people that the cartels are sending into America. And those people are walking across the border and they're going to the cities. They're getting places to live. There are cartel cells in every city, right? And so those cartel, they need people to work in America, right? And they sit in these cities and they start up the business. They move the fentanyl, they move the meth, they move the guns, they move the money, right? So it's the people that we have to keep out of this country. When you talk about 150 Los Zetas coming into Texas, that really doesn't surprise me because the border is wide open, right? We don't have enough Border Patrol agents to patrol the entire southwest border. They don't even have people. And quite frankly, up until recently, they were babysitters 24 hours a day. Now at least the numbers have gone down and we've done a good job despite the lack of support from Washington because they're too busy on the witch hunt, right? Which, again, I don't want to be political, but let's talk about prioritization. We have a war on our border. We have people dying like crazy. You bring up a point about Al-Qaeda. Suppose there was 1 pound of biological or chemical weapon south of the southwest border in Mexico. Can you imagine if our country knew that this chemical existed, how the intel community, everyone would be all over that? But we have fentanyl. 1 kilogram will kill 500 or could kill 500,000 people, right? So it is a chemical weapon. We just don't look at it like that. But the poor kids that are popping those little MS, the Mexi Oxy pills that are all over. Hey, Dan, I got a stat for you because this is important to give the viewers and the listeners a little bit something to think about. In the Phoenix DEA office alone, right? In 2015, they seized 0 Mexi Oxy pills. Those are the little blue, counterfeit Mexican pill, right? And they have fentanyl in them. In 2016, there was let me get the stats. 2016 there was 20,000. 17 was 54,000. 18 was 380,000. And guess what they had? 19, 1.4 million. So do the math, Dan. It goes from 0 to 1.4 million in 5 years, right? Can you imagine what's got into the country? Can you imagine what's out there that we don't know about? Because we're only seizing a small percentage. But the reason I say that is because that's a chemical attack on our country because those pills will kill instantly. And they are killing instantly. That's why you have all these deaths all over the place. And that's what I'm trying to say. This is different than anything we've ever dealt with. This isn't the 1980s marijuana cigarette, right? This is poison coming from labs in China. And so we're not thinking this through. And by the way, speaking of China, China is very, very engaged and integrated with the cartels. You know why the methamphetamine is exploding all over this country, Dan? Like Utah, you saw the news in Utah, right? Yep. They went from hardly anybody overdosing from meth laced with fentanyl to massive numbers, right?
I got the numbers here. Yeah, it was 31 people in 2010. It's 217 in 2018, and God knows what it was this past year.
Right. And so, Dan, what's happened is the cartels many years ago, when the U.S. government did a great job at keeping pseudoephedrine and ephedrine out of our country, right? Remember when you had to go to you go to Walmart or you go to CVS, you have to give your license, right? Because you want some pseudoephedrine. It's so stupid, but it actually helped pushed some of this stuff away from America, so the lab operators in America couldn't produce the meth. So the Mexican cartel, Sinaloa cartel, took advantage. They had formed relationships with the Chinese and other Asian chemical companies, ton quantities of chemicals coming into Mexico to make methamphetamine. Then they built the super labs, not like the mom and pop basement labs, where they're producing thousands of kilos of this meth. My buddies from Boston DEA just went down to Mexico. They went to a lab site. This particular lab was producing 7 tons of meth every 3 days. Think about that. This is the type of operation they have. And guess what? That's why the seizures of meth and the overdoses and all the meth usage is going through the roof, because the cartels are aligned with China and they're producing this substance at record levels.
So what's the biggest tool in the toolbox? We talk about, you mentioned something very important, the criminal alien networks, the immigration problem that we talk about here so much. I always concede that, yeah, we're not going to be able to patrol every inch of our soil, although if we had a military mindset, I think that would change, because we still don't have a military mission for CBP. It's more of a law enforcement mission, and I think you articulate that well. But they forget the interior enforcement element of this. One of the people that I'm very thankful that you introduced me to was Robert Murphy, the special agent in charge of DEA in Atlanta. And he always tells me, he's told me this on the record, that at a primary trafficking level, almost all of these guys are illegal aliens. And the difference of that is very simple. See, if you catch an American, it's like, all right, what are you going to do? Here's some probation. Here's some drug courts. But here, hey, wait a minute. You're here illegally. You're out of here. Oh, you're illegally. You're out of here. So what happens over time? I want to read to you the money quote from this Salt Lake Tribune article that just came out this week on the meth crisis in Utah. And they talk about the amount of meth they seized, 235 kilograms in the highways, just that one little unit in the Utah State Troopers. Market factors may explain meth's rapid rise in Utah. A pound of meth costs $1,000 to $1,500, with a single hit going for about $20, about 1/10 of the cost of the early 2000s. The price is so low on methamphetamine right now, some of these street or low-level dealers are able to afford larger quantities than they've had in the past. What Mr. Murphy always tells me is that if we simply enforced our immigration laws and every illegal alien we caught, rather than cycling them in and out, threw them out. So what would happen is you wouldn't eliminate all drugs, but, you know, in law enforcement, that's never your goal. The goal is to mitigate the problem. Guess what? It becomes more scarce because it's prohibitively costly, because they can't have a network that just operates in plain sight because you're an illegal alien and will get you and throw you out, and the cost will go up. And you know what? Maybe we'll have people dying, but it will be the numbers of last decade, not this decade.
Right. I mean, Dan, you talk about Rob Murphy, like Atlanta Division, that's been a hub for the Mexican cartels for many years now, you know, the whole East Coast, right? And so in Atlanta, there was a case back a while ago now. They had a methamphetamine conversion lab, right? And there were like 7 subjects arrested. I think it was a Jalisco or Sinaloa network, right? But Here's the deal. 6 out of the 7 people arrested were illegal aliens. And those guys came over the border. I was told they even were carrying the liquid meth in the backpacks, right, to help produce the meth. And then this lab, I think they seized like 400 pounds of meth in a U.S. lab. This was like one of the biggest labs in the last 20 years seized by the DEA, right? But here's the thing. They dumped all that toxic waste in the land and everything like that. And like 1 pound of this waste, like 1 pound of meth can produce like 5 pounds of toxic waste. So that's like 2,000 pounds of toxic waste. We don't hear all the environmentalists, right, coming out of the woodwork about that, right? So we have these illegals. They're all over the country. They're causing havoc. I mean, look at a case out in L.A. with the MS-13, that medieval style killings. They ripped the heart out of the guy's body. Right? 19 out of 22 were all MS-13 illegals, right? Who have a motto of rape, kill, and control. And we want those monsters in our country? Are you kidding me? So the people being here in the country is a really big part of the problem for the drug crisis. But just because I want to make this clear, I'm also a very, very big advocate that we have dropped the ball in this country on the drug education. So the demand is through the roof, right? So when President Obama was in office, unfortunately, they were focused, on the war on terror, which is great, right? But they totally took their eye off the ball on drugs. And then when Big Pharma started pumping 76 billion, you saw that Washington Post story, right? 6 years, 76 billion opioid pills dumped in America, right? Well, all those people got addicted. Then the cartels came in and they took advantage of the addicted population and they started putting out the very low price, high purity white heroin that kids can snort, right? The kids snort it for $10 a bag. They get high. Now they got this addiction. They need this stuff. Then the Mexicans align themselves with the Chinese. They spend $5,000 a kilogram of fentanyl in China. They bring it to a lab in Mexico. They start chopping it up, and their profits going through the roof. But then the poor kid who's addicted is on the street desperately looking for his fix, and he's snorting now not heroin, but fentanyl, and he's not waking up. This is the evolution of the crisis. But it's the people. They have so many people already in America in place. Their business is booming, right? So if you arrest 10 or 15 of them, they're going to get 10 or 15 more that are crossing tomorrow, right? And they're here. And all these statistics that they put out about the border, right? So I'm happy to say that the CBP has done a tremendous job bringing the numbers down, of the apprehensions, right? But what about all the people we don't even know that are here? Like, how do you know what you don't know, Dan? Like, you're smart, man. So tell me, how do you know who has gotten over here and how do you know who they are? That's the thing I don't understand.
As Murphy always says, drugs don't produce themselves. They don't sell themselves. They don't transfer the profits back themselves. You need the networks. And I love it. If you remember, we passed around some articles together, a group of us last week. Beth Warren of the Louisville Courier Journal posted a really detailed article on Kentucky and how the cartels, Jalisco, El Mencho in particular, has a foothold in all of rural America. And it was a good article, but they skirted the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And I love a quote she had here. Amazing quote here. She talked about how the cartels, quote, exploit its connections with otherwise hardworking immigrants. Now, she leaves off the point that they're illegal immigrants because the case study she had there, this person who was grooming the thoroughbred horses for Kentucky's horse racing industry, he was a good guy grooming horses, but he was transferring $30 million of drugs for El Mencho overnight. Well, it turns out he was an illegal alien if you look at the U.S. Attorney's website. So my problem is, if you look at rural America, wherever you see these farms and these agricultural interests that bring in illegal aliens, well, what you're also having there is the conduit for El Mencho to go and bring them in. What if we just actually, enforce the laws? I'm not talking about a new war on drugs. I'm talking about enforce our jurisdictional sovereignty. What would happen to the price of some of these drugs?
Right. They wouldn't have the people. I mean, Dan, you make some great points. I mean, look, you need the people in an organization. If you run a business, if you run a Fortune 500 company, you need the people, right? The bosses are only as good as the people, right? That's the old saying, right? We're only as good as our people as leaders. So if you're Chapo Guzman, you're only as good as your people. So your guy that's recruiting the organization to work in Chicago has to have all the people in place, right? The people are the ones that do the running around, doing the distribution, doing the money collections, the money counting, the trade-based money laundering. So you have to have the people, and the people are all over this place. And it's going to continue to get worse because we're really not doing a lot about securing that border. For how many years now, Dan, has the U.S. failed in securing that border, really? Let's think about it, right? I'm not a border expert, but in talking to all the border experts, this has been a disaster for years, right? And now all of a sudden, it's Trump had, inherited this mess. I like to say he's inherited a dysfunctional mess because people weren't taking care of business.
So, Derek, isn't it true that what we're looking for with the cartel designation is not that, we're going to sit and do to Mexico what we did in the Middle East and try to build up their society? What it should be is an expression of America first is, look, I wish we could help the Mexican people, but the first step is helping ourselves. And why can't we draw a perimeter around our border and say, when you have La Linea, you have Jalisco, Sinaloa, CDN, Golfo lining our border, we are going to treat this not as a law enforcement operation. Oh, a law has been broken. There's been an illegal entry. Let's go and investigate. I mean, that's CBP's mindset. I mean, that's what they're trained to do. Rather, we will treat it as a military operation, not so much to go into Mexico, although I think we shouldn't rule out targeted strikes when they're needed, but to simply say, like we did it with Pearl Harbor, no foreign belligerent paramilitary group is going to get on our soil.
Right.
I mean, if we can't do that, then what are we?
Right. So before you ask the question, and I don't think I answered the question, but it was a really good question about the tools, right? So probably in my personal opinion, the most important thing would be the money flow, right? Because if they don't get their money, right, then they're not going to be able to continue doing and escalating their business. But you need the people, right? So you got to keep the people out, right? And you have to shut down whatever existing money laundering schemes that they have in America. Shut them down, identify the dirty banks, identify the dirty businesses, right? Identify all the people associated with it, use the Treasury stuff to keep them all out, shut down, disrupt their ability to move money, which crushes them, right? And at the same time, a simultaneous attack on the chemicals that they're using to produce this poison. So if they're getting tons and tons of kilograms of precursor chemicals from China and India and all these other countries, shut down that flow. Have a massive effort to shut it down. I know it's not that easy, but trust me, the U.S. intel community and the Department of Defense and others that are out there, other partners that we have, they have really good capabilities. And I'm not trying to say that law enforcement is not doing their job. Law enforcement works really hard. I'm proud of the law enforcement guys and ladies that are out there, but it's not enough. It has to be a more all-inclusive unity of effort attack where you have this powerful force of U.S. good, right, good people going after this problem. So we got to stop with this beltway bantering. Everyone's positioning. Everyone's got an angle. And the one thing I do worry about, Dan, to be really clear, is if tomorrow we got this thing passed, then all these people are going to be claiming asylum and we can have millions of them coming into America, right? And this is a problem. I don't have the answer to that, Dan. You probably have. So please tell me.
Enforce immigration law. I mean, I'm just saying the president has the power. No one could assert themselves on us. We could say, look, asylum was an individual thing. You can't have mass migration. 1182F at USC, the president could shut off all or any.
That's right. I mean, okay, so that's the way to do it.
That's important. It's not that you're wrong. In the way these guys think, in their mind, they think we have to accept. We don't have sovereignty. We are not a sovereign nation. Anyone could make a claim, and we have to indulge that. Well, yeah, if that is your mindset, I rigorously disagree with that. But then you got a big problem. But that's my point. It needs to be the opposite. It needs to be, and I want to. Derek, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. Any law enforcement person I have on the program, I read this to now, and I'm going to read this to you, and I'm just going to get your comment on it.
Okay.
2004, the staff of the 9/11 Commission. So it wasn't the 9/11 Commission report proper. They had a couple of ancillary reports. This was the 9/11 Commission staff report on terrorism and travel. And knowing everything not just about the drugs and crime angle, but and the drugs and cartel terrorism angle, but also the drugs and Islamic terror angle. This is an amazing quote. Listening to this in 2004, when 15 years later, the same problem still exists and we haven't solved it. It is perhaps obvious to state that terrorists cannot plan and carry out attacks in the United States if they are unable to enter the country. Yet prior to September 11th, while there were efforts to enhance border security, no agency of the U.S. government thought of border security as a tool in the counterterrorism arsenal. Indeed, even after 9/11, 19 hijackers demonstrated the relative ease of obtaining a U.S. visa and gaining admission to the U.S., border security still is not considered a cornerstone of national security policy. We believe, for reasons we discussed in the following pages, that it must be made one.
It's real straightforward to me. And this is the problem. I mean, these studies, these investigations, these reports, what good are they if nobody's reading them and no one's acting on them, right? It's the same thing like, hey, Dan, everyone is saying how terrorists are turning to criminal networks for the funding, right? Because they don't have the same level of funding anymore. But yet we still have the government agencies with the silos between the terror investigations and the crime investigations. So again, you have to read these things and evaluate them. They make sense. Keep those people out and our country's going to be safer. It's that simple.
And again, the difference is that we can't keep bad Americans out, right? You have to deal with them. And increasingly with this criminal justice reform, nobody serves any time. So they're going to be out in 3 minutes doing the same thing. But at least we don't have to deal with the recidivism of other countries' dudes. And I want to take this to the final level. I know you got to go soon, beyond drugs, but the narco culture of violence also that's percolating. So what I find important, and I wrote this in my article of 5 different important spheres of designating the cartels as terrorists and what we need to do with it. And one is collection of data. So what's interesting is when you see a rash of bank robberies, you know, well, that's likely inherent domestically in our own criminal culture. You have bank robberies. But when suddenly you start seeing peculiar crimes, or peculiar terrible cultural activities, let's say honor killings, right? We were tracking that a little bit here, FGM. Well, that's not, suddenly there's been an uptick in FGM. Well, no. What happened was over the last 15 years, you brought in a lot of unvetted people from Islamic countries in too great of quantities, and particularly Pakistan is where that's endemic of. So that's fundamentally an external problem. You can't tell me honor killings was native in America. Well, now it is, but you brought that in. Same thing here with certain spheres of the drug crisis, many spheres of it, but also with the violence. And I'm going to leave you with this. A couple months ago, I reported on a case of very crazy shooting on I-70 near Indianapolis. Picture going 70 miles an hour. And first they thought it was a terrible car crash. But in the end, they found that actually what happened was one guy shot a guy at high speed, the same thing you would have in Mexico, headshot, one shot, and they swerved into each other and there was a crash. But they found a bullet in the guy's brain. And then I looked at the name of the suspect and it sounded, like he was an illegal alien. I checked in with ICE and indeed there was an ICE hold on him. He's an illegal alien. I said, wait a minute. Are we not bringing in this cartel culture of violence, albeit it's just a little bit more subtle than what's going on in Mexico proper?
Right. I mean, look, I was studying for years. When I was the head of SOD, I was studying all the cartel violence in America. And I saw stuff that I couldn't even believe. Like, as an example, there was a guy in Detroit. His buddy set him up. He lit him on fire. He duct taped his whole body, put gasoline on him, and lit him on fire. This was a guy that he went to the zoo with his family, right? There was another guy who basically they chopped off his hands, right? There's one story after another, like burned a guy to a crisp down in Atlanta. They doing all these home invasions. Like, that's a big thing that we don't talk enough about, Dan. So there's a lot of innocent people that are sitting at their homes at night, and all of a sudden the door gets broken down, and it's a bunch of illegals or Mexican cartel guys or gangsters, MS-13 type, and they're looking for drugs and money in the house, but they got the wrong location, right? Yep. So they go to the local realtor, they get a tip that this location is loaded with drugs and contraband. They're trying to rip it off, and what happens is they got the wrong location. Right? You heard like how law enforcement hits the wrong door. Well, the bad guys are hitting the wrong door. Now the poor lady's got a hot iron on her side and he's torturing her for the money. And she's like, I had no money in the house, right? And these animals are torturing people, innocent Americans. This is happening. They're tying people up. They're kidnapping people. They're calling back to Mexico to get payment. They're shooting people in the middle of the night with AK-47s all dressed in black. Here's another one. We had case after case where they were doing methamphetamine for grenades. So they were finding these guys that worked at the military installations that somehow had the ability to get access to grenades, and they were trading meth for grenades. Now, I don't know what they did. We had one case, Dan, in Dallas, Texas. We found a live grenade in the house of the Mexican. You know what he told the cops when he was cooperating? They were going to use that grenade against the cops. Now, it didn't happen, and maybe he didn't mean it, but these are the kind of things. We had another case where on the wiretap, the guy says, yeah, I just shot the guy in the head. I'm going to bury him. We sent the police to the house. Guess what we found in the SUV? A guy wrapped up in a towel with bullet holes in his head.
In America, on our soil.
Yeah, in America, yeah. Oh, wait, I got one more. This is important. So 1,000 miles from the border, I think it was Alabama, we had 5 dead people. They had jumper cables connected to their ears, and they had burn marks because they were torturing them before they sliced them up and killed them on the ground in the house, 1,000 miles from the border. So this is not a border problem. This is an American problem. It's an American national security issue. So the government has to wake up. And they're not, unfortunately, they're just not making much progress.
Indeed, the open border has turned every American town and even rural areas into border cities. And I just find that amazing that I remember when DEA put out their threat assessment last year. Like I told you before, I don't know why in the world they haven't put out this year's threat assessment. I've been picking them for it because I really want to see what they have to say. But what I found was amazing. DEA's threat assessment from 2018 says the following. It says, the Mexican cartels provide a steady stream of drugs to the Chicago area. Though the Sinaloa cartel and CJNG are the city's most notable sources of supply, other Mexican cartels that deliver drugs to the area include BLO, Gulf Cartel, La Familia, Macallan, and Los Guerreros Unidos. Chicago is home to several street gangs that are heavily involved in drug distribution, and collectively, these gangs serve as the primary mid-level and retail-level drug distributors for the cartels. These gangs are also responsible for a substantial portion of the city's violent crime. To me, that was a eureka moment because we all think of Chicago, it's like a domestic issue, and a certain amount is. Yeah, it's just like violent, maybe black gangs. But then I looked at this DA report and I studied and I watched the National Geographic on the Bloods and the Crips, which are domestic. And I said, wait a minute, it seems like a good part of what we view as, hey, there's a robbery here, there's a murder here, there's a shooting here, like typical domestic local crime that you'll hear on local news for the last 50 years. How much of that is being driven by this problem, which is external?
Right. Well, so Dan, in that example in Chicago, I could tell you firsthand because I was part of working on this. In Chicago, the twins, right, Mexican-American twins, were working for the Sinaloa cartel, specifically Chapo, the Flores brothers. They were the ones providing all the cocaine, like tons of cocaine, to all the gangs. And so that's how the case on Chapo in Chicago was made. They worked the case from the gangs in Chicago to the twins. The twins then cooperated and gave up the Sinaloa cartel's network from Mexico to L.A. to Chicago. And that's how they put the evidence against Chapo. So it was very closely connected from the gangs in Chicago to Chapo Guzman, the biggest drug trafficker we've ever seen, right? So people out there want to look at gangs as a separate issue. No, the gangs that are killing all these people in Chicago are getting the drugs, and the people are from Mexico coming in and operating the cartel's mission in Chicago. This is common sense. This is happening not just Chicago, all over the place. And we're just sitting there and we're trying to separate these things. It's a gang issue. No, it's a drug issue. It's a terrorism issue. No, it's our national security. What are we doing? Where's the sense of urgency? And it's really frustrating.
Where's the sense of urgency? Look, I mean, I guess we could just blow the roof off forever here. I do want our listeners to know there is a whole nother show that you and I need to do on a peculiar type of drug trafficking, the K2 spice that is particularly the synthetic marijuana that's killing kids, laced with rat poison, particularly being sold by Yemeni immigrants in this country, ties into EBT fraud, cigarette trafficking. Again, very interesting. You start seeing trends, you unfold it. It's not just, low-level offenses. Another interesting thing you mentioned, which is a whole nother show in itself. I love it how, right now they're like, we don't want to lock anyone up for drug crimes. And we ignore the fact that, A, they're doing a lot of other horrible crimes. And that's why crime is now going up in all of these cities, because we're just not locking up anyone anymore. But also the interesting thing is, if you don't have tough sentencing to threaten them with, you can't leverage them to give up the network.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the key.
That was a beautiful example of that.
Well, I'll give you an example. Like back in the day when I was actually doing cases and supervising cases, with the sentencing guidelines, especially in the federal system, when you arrested a guy and he had an extensive arrest record in the state, the guy was facing 40 years, right? 25, 40 years. And if he had young children, right, he had more of an incentive to cooperate with America, to provide everything he knew for his entire life of crime. Well, that gave the law enforcement agencies the ability to then go after other people in the communities and kind of do a good job. Now, if the guy's thinking, I'm only going to get 2 years, or I'm going to do a year, I'm going to be out tomorrow, he's not going to cooperate. And so this is a huge incentive. And it really was successful, and it kills law enforcement. The bread and butter of law enforcement, Dan, is the human source. And the only way you're going to get the human source to cooperate with law enforcement, not the only way, but the main way, is the leverage over the sentencing. When they have a family, they have their kids, they start feeling bad, they don't want to go to jail the rest of their life, and they start cooperating. So this whole thing with the sentencing is off track. Because
oh my gosh.
Because don't get me wrong, you can't put a Mexican truck driver who's doing produce and bringing it up to New York, and one day he puts 50 kilos of cocaine in his truck. You can't put him in jail for life. That's a little bit over the top, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about those guys that are causing havoc in all the cities, that are in and out of the state jails, and then they get involved with a 50-kilo drug deal. Now they go away. They don't come out.
That's the whole point. Reagan talked about that all the time, and it worked. That's why the murder rate dropped 65%, the violent crime rate dropped, and now Chicago, Atlanta, LA, San Francisco, even Oklahoma, they've dabbled with this sentencing reform.
Dan, we have cleaned up areas in cities because of the federal conspiracy laws and the sentencing guidelines. Unfortunately, a lot of these states, because the prisons are overpopulated and stuff like that, these guys aren't even going to jail. They're not even getting, they're going right out. They're just leaving right from the court. I can't
tell you, oh my gosh, in my file here, I don't even have time to write about all these cases. The worst cases, this was in Comstock, a home killing suspect was released from jail days earlier. I looked at this guy's rap sheet: robbery, assault, weapons charges, and of course you have drugs there, because drugs is the trade of all the bad guys, whether they're individual criminals, gang members, criminal networks, terrorist networks. And it's not just about the drugs. It all ties in. Stop decompartmentalizing each thing.
Hey, Dan, you know what? One of the things you just said, which is I've been very vocal about this lately, and people get mad when I say this, but the lead agency concept has to end. Because in other words, like the DEA has—
Can you explain that a little bit? Just what you mean by—
So right now in this country, it's always been like the DEA is the lead on drugs, right? And ATF, they're the lead on guns, right? FBI is the lead on terrorism, right? Homeland Security is the, lead on immigration or whatever. The reality is they all come together, right? So that's why when I built up SOD, I built up a synergy of effort of all these agencies. So it's a task force environment where it all comes together. If you have silos up between all of these different agencies, which we do, and you have everyone competing for attention and budgets, then what happens is everyone does their own thing in their own lane. But the drug trafficker is not really just a drug trafficker. The drug trafficker is involved with the gangsters, involved with the gun runners, involved with the terrorists, involved with the money launderers. And so you have to do a better job of breaking down those silos.
Yeah, Derek, I know you got to run to a meeting now. I'm going to tease out to our audience exactly what you said. The next show we do, and God willing, we'll do pretty soon, is exactly on that point. People that your department caught before that were likely notorious Islamic terrorists overseas, here in American towns, and the prosecutors from their vantage point, Justice Department, just another drug case. But no, the drugs are often the honeypot for something so much bigger.
Exactly. That's the key, what you just said. And that's what's really missing right now. And it's not just drugs, counterfeiting, right? illegal cigarette trafficking. And that's why I'm so obsessive with that topic, because Peter King wrote about that in 2007. It's gotten worse. It's evolved into this unbelievable problem for America, and we're just not addressing it.
Just not addressing it. We could go on forever. Derek, thanks so much for all you do. We'll have this show out later today. Look, we thought this week would be kind of dead. I thought I was half dead. I was doped up on morphine and stuff like that all week, but thank God, God has given me strength to come back, bounce back from the dead. We had a pretty productive second half of the week here. Have a great weekend, everyone. Send me your comments and questions that you have for Derek that I could ask him offline, or the next time we have it on D. Horowitz at blazemedia.com. Like our videos at YouTube. Make sure you go and subscribe to our channel at YouTube. ConservativeReview.com is the webpage. God bless y'all and have a terrific weekend.